Welcome to the Monday Motivation Spotlight, another episode featuring an inspiring individual, business owner, or company making a difference in Israel. You've heard me mention the name many times, Egert Cohen Insurance, when we thank them for their partnership for this and for activities in the Israel Networking Hub. So today we have the Mr. Cohen, part of the Egert Cohen brand, Shimon Cohen, who is our guest today, who's going to share with us some interesting stories and some behind the scenes things that happen that we don't see on the other side. So Shimon, firstly, thank you very much for being our guest. We're excited to have you. We also thank you for your ongoing sponsorship, partnership. We've collaborated for many years. You've been in Israel well over 35 years, I think even close to 40 years. I've been here 36 years. Egert Cohen has been around. It was started in 1985. I made aliyah in 1990. It was started by your late father-in-law, Roman Egert. And since I made aliyah, I've heard of the name and we've been associated with Egert Cohen Insurance, and so have many other Anglos and, of course, Israelis too. So share with us, before we start, share with us about who Shimon Cohen is, growing up in South Africa, that's where you made aliyah from. And also, was aliyah always part of the dream? Was it always part of your conversations? And then we'll move into Egert Cohen and the insurance line.
Yeah, sure. Nice to be here. I was born in, if anyone knows this place, please raise your hand. I was born in Bertram's, which in Johannesburg, which even then was a bad neighborhood, and grew up in Bertram's, Kensington. We became involved in Bnei Akiva, which is a long story in itself, but that started the spark of wanting to come to Israel. And even though we were very involved, I met my wife to be Merle. We were very involved in the political scene in Johannesburg. I never forget, there was one Sunday morning, there was a picture on the front page of the Sunday Times, if I'm not mistaken, of Haboni Madrichim being arrested. And the next day, there was a meeting of the Zionist Council in South Africa, and they told us if this ever happens, in other words, if there are pictures of members of the Zionist youth movements getting involved in politics in South Africa, they're going to cut our budgets. So we had a long discussion. We had to decide what's more important, politics in South Africa or working for Israel. So we decided personally that we were going to work for Israel, and eventually we made aliyah, which is a story in itself. My name is actually Selwan.
Correct. I used to call you Selwan for all the years, and at some stage I just transitioned into Shimon.
Yeah, so people who know me from the old home call me Selwan, but when we arrived, El was on strike. When we arrived at the airport at 12 o'clock at night, used to make aliyah at the airport. And when we came in, the guy said, "What's your name?" I said, "My name is Selwan." He says, "Ein Shem Kazeh." He was kovea that there's no name like that. He said, "What's your Hebrew name?" I said, "My name is Shimon." He said, "Fine, that's a good name, Shimon." So immediately I changed from Selwan to Shimon. And my wife, whose name was Merle, he said, "What's your name?" She said, "Merle." He said, "Mel and Davar Kazeh." "What's your Hebrew name?" "Olga." So we became Shimon the Olga Cohen overnight. And that was, of course, some interesting stories when we gave birth to our children, and we went to change the names. We're now Shimon and Miriam Cohen. And if you look in the phone book, there are about 50 pages of Shimon and Miriam Cohen. It's like the most common name in Israel, but we've grown to love it. Anyway, we made I first came to study here in Yeshivat Or Samer for a year and a half, went back to Cape Town on a shlichut for about 5 years, and then we made aliyah again in 1983. And we've been here since then. I'm actually a teacher by profession. I taught English in Boys Town. I still meet some of my ex-students now who recognize me, but I'm afraid I don't recognize them anymore. After about 10 years in, around 1990, my father-in-law and my mother-in-law convinced me to join the business, and that's where it started. Egert Cohen started from then.
Fantastic. And I love your story about the names. You're not the first one that I've heard stories like that. Other people that have suddenly changed their last names and spelling upon landing in Israel, that they've also told a similar thing. So that's cool to hear. And the name is not just a name, it's part of our identity. My Hebrew name is Leah. And I know at one stage I had a neighbor who was calling me Leah. And when I didn't respond because I didn't know she was talking to me, then she landed up calling me Lesley. But that's also one of those awkward names in Hebrew that I have to actually say how to pronounce it. So Shimon Cohen, even though a million Shimon Cohens, there's only one Shimon Cohen associated, and that's your USP with Egert Cohen. So that's who you are. All right. So you started off, am I correct? Your first, I don't know if your first home was Efrat. You may have landed up somewhere else, but then you were one of the pioneers, your family, of Efrat in the early days, and you were there for many years and then moved to Ramat Beit Shemesh. Do you want to tell us anything about that?
Yeah, correct. We were the first, I think we were the 36th or 37th family to move into Efrat. There were no phones. For 2 years, there was only one public phone, and those were the days before cell phones. Any news took a long time to filter down to us. The bus service was terrible. People described us as chalutzim with the microwave ovens. That's probably a good description of it. But we really were chalutzim in the early days. Efrat was just being built. And we spent many good years there. And about 22 years ago, we moved down the hill. We're part of a whole family. There's 4 sisters, and they all moved down to Ramat Beit Shemesh. And Baruch Hashem, we're very happy.
You're very happy there. And at this stage, I'll also give a shout out to your brother-in-law and to your partner in business, who I actually haven't seen for quite a while, Yona Egert. We also had kids in the same school, so we used to meet over Shabbat at Shabbatonim that they had. So he's still in Efrat, from what I understand, correct?
Yeah, we couldn't pull him away from Efrat.
Okay, great. All right, let's move into the insurance line and into Egert Cohen. So you and Yona joined your father and father-in-law and really have built up the business to an amazing size right now. For anyone who calls the offices, I know I'm exaggerating when I hear 1 million different shluchot and different numbers. So thank God, Baruch Hashem, you've built up the office to the great size that it is. Let's start off with some kind of funny story, interesting story, anything you'd like to share with us that is one of those can only happen in Israel or insurance stories. Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, the most interesting thing to talk about in insurance is obviously claims, because nobody really wants to read the legalese of the wording of the policy, but claims are interesting. And one of the more interesting claims we had was many years ago, where a young couple had insured the expensive tefillin. Now, normally today you can insure your tefillin as part of your home contents, but in those days you had it insured separately, and it was an expensive pair of tefillin, if I remember correctly, was worth about, we insured it for $6,000. And he used to take the tefillin to Yeshivat Mir every day. And one day he called us up and said that the tefillin had been stolen. I said, listen, this is Yeshivat Mir. Who's going to steal your tefillin? But they weren't there. He said he put them in the shelf. There was like there's 1 million shelves there. He put his tefillin in the shelf and they weren't there. So I said, look, wait a couple of days. Maybe somebody took them by mistake. He waited a week. Nothing happened. I called up the yeshiva office and I said, look, the tefillin had been stolen. Do you have any cameras? So the answer I got from them was, no tefillin are stolen in Yeshivat Mir. It doesn't happen. Anyway, to cut long story short, we put in a claim and the guy was paid out the $6,000. And about a month later, I got a call from him and he said, you're not going to believe what happened. I said, what? In the meantime, he bought a new pair of tefillin, obviously. He said, I was in the middle of davening Shmona Esrei and I saw a hand come from behind me and put my old tefillin bag on my stender and disappear. I couldn't turn around. I was in the middle of davening. And when I turned around, obviously there was just holy people davening behind me. No one that looked like a tefillin thief. And now I've got 2 pairs of tefillin, the new tefillin that I bought from the insurance company money, and I've got the old pair of tefillin back. What should I do? So I said, look, that's a fair question. I called the insurance company and said, look, this guy wants to give the tefillin back because basically he was paid out for them. So the manager said, what am I going to do with a pair of tefillin? What can I do with them? So the manager eventually said, you know something, I'll sell it back to the guy at half price. So I went back to the client and I said, are you prepared to pay half price for your old tefillin? So the guy said, look, we just had a baby son born. So I'm going to keep these tefillin for him. So that's why he ended up. He got a beautiful new pair of tefillin for himself. And please God, now his son is wearing his old ex-stolen tefillin. So that's one cute story that I remember.
Wow, and that'll certainly be a family story along their lines that
Absolutely.
will be told for certainly the next generation. All right, that's an interesting story.
One thing I do want to say one thing about our clientele, and it's happened many times, that we have people calling us even sometimes 5 years later saying that the diamond ring that we lost 5 years ago, and now we're moving home and we found the same diamond ring behind the couch. What should we do with that? And every time I come back to the insurance company and say, look, they found the ring and they want to return the money, or what should we do with the ring? The company is astounded because people don't do this.
That is so honest, and it's fantastic to know that we're living with such honest people around us, right?
Yeah, so it happened many times, I have to say, and each time I know the manager writes them a special letter and says, thank you so much. So obviously, it's not a common thing that happens. Not everybody does it, but thank God our clients are, I think, are all honest.
Wow. Okay. What about the issue of insurance? What do you find, or do you find areas where people make mistakes with insurance or that they think that they're covered and they're not covered?
Yeah, the funny thing about insurance is that people tend to think we often get this thing where a person's been paying insurance for 20 years and then he has a claim which is not covered. And what's the classic retort that he'll come back with? I've been paying for all these years and now that I have a claim, you're not going to pay it. I always tell them this insurance is not charity. In other words, there's a protocol, there's a policy. It's got to fit into the policy. One of the classic things that we often have is water damage. Water damage is a terrible claim to have to deal with because you never know where the damage started from, where it came from. But often people have been living in their house for, let's say, 20 or 30 years, and it's just wear and tear. And they somehow think that the insurance company has to replace all their old pipes or their old air conditioner or their old refrigerator. And we have to explain to them that what's covered is a pipe bursting. That's what it is. And it doesn't mean that the insurance company is going to replace all the pipes in your house. It means they're going to repair that spot. And if another spot next to it pops in a month or a year's time, they're going to come and repair that spot. People say, but that's stupid. Why did they do that? So I tell them, look, imagine if it wasn't like that. A person would buy an old apartment, take out insurance, and a week later call the insurance company and say, listen, I've got a pipe burst, come and change all the pipes. Obviously, no insurance company is going to do that. So we have to explain it to people. People don't always want to understand that. And that's, I think, what's one of the areas that people make a mistake on, where they think that water damage means that the company is going to automatically change everything for them, which unfortunately is not true.
Going back to your story about mirror, and it can happen with different things, not only tefillin, is that I'm curious to know, this was out of the house that it happened. In other words, did this person have his insurance covered also for in the house and also for mirror? Because we find if people have got items covered that are maybe stolen in the car or the car's broken into. Do you want to share with our viewers something a little bit about that, if it's not in the actual home, and how people can insure items that are on the road, let's call it?
Yeah. Okay. So you've hit on another one of those problem areas. You can insure with what's called all risks. All risks means that you're covered both inside and outside the house. And normally that's for jewelry. A woman's got a nice ring or a necklace or whatever, and she wears it inside and outside. So if the diamond falls off, which happens sometimes, or it gets misplaced at the wedding or whatever it is, so that's called all risks and it's covered. But nothing is covered when taken from a car. It's just too much of a risk. And we make it very clear. We, for example, send out a summary of all our policies in English because a lot of our clientele is English speaking. And we make that very clear. But people sometimes forget, and it reminds me of one of the classic claims that we had. It was a youth group, I won't mention their name, who was traveling overseas. This is travel insurance now, where the same thing applies. Nothing is covered when stolen from a car. And they left not one, not two, but three laptops on the back seat of a rental car. And they were all stolen with a lot of money, with all the information on it, and just wasn't covered.
Which is a difficult scenario because you would think all risk would cover some of these things. And as we know, most of us, our cars are like our second homes that I'm not saying we leave expensive things all the time in the car, but at any given time, there could be something expensive being left in the car.
Correct. So don't leave your kids in the car and don't leave your expensive things in the car. That's the rule of thumb.
Exactly. Your kids, no matter how much insurance you have, nothing can replace your children.
Correct.
As we've seen.
Correct. I'll tell another story in the same line where we had a claim where a woman claimed that there was a theft in her house and she had a lot of money stolen. So when they came to check, they didn't find any sign of forced entry. Normally when there's theft, you can see if somebody forced a lock or whatever it is. So they said, where's the front door key? Did you leave the door open? She said, no, I locked the door. She said, but I put the key in the flower pot next to the front door. So the company...
The classic mistake that everyone makes.
Yeah, but I'm saying this was so obvious. You could actually see the key. It wasn't even a subtle hiding place. It was really just plunked in the flower pot next to the front door. So that's called Rashtanut Toreme. It's not just negligence. You've caused a negligence. Most claims are negligence. You make a mistake. You forgot to put the handbrake on the car and it rolls down the hill. That's one thing. But putting a sign on your door and saying to the robbers, here is the key, please come in, that is a bit too much. So I think they paid 20% of the claim. And the client wasn't very happy, but she also wasn't very clever. So what can you do?
And that too, if not in the flower pot, I know when I go to friends or even sometimes family members, and I'm often the one to tell them, you shouldn't be leaving the key here. Or if it's the old-fashioned doors, the new doors today, you close the door even if you don't lock it. There's no place for a key in the keyhole in the front door. And for some of the older doors, they leave the keys in the door, or they leave it hanging on a hook right next to the door, or they leave their bag. They walk in the house, throw their bag down next to the door. These are all no-nos, I understand, correct?
Correct. But again, once you're inside your own house, that's a little bit different. But leaving the key outside your house, like the insurance company said, that's one step too far.
Share with us some other interesting stories, maybe on the health side or even on the home side, God forbid, fires or whatever, where people either thought they were covered or people try to be cheap on insurance and aren't fully covered. Things that maybe our viewers can learn to try avoid. Like with anything, we say you have to pay for something good to be able to be covered.
Yeah, one of the claims that sticks out in my mind is a dafka happened on Yom Ha'atzmaut, where you can't get any assessor to come and assess the damage. Normally, we do that the same day. So this happened in Ramat Beit Shemesh, actually. The client called me the night after Yom Ha'atzmaut, and he said, I've had a huge fire. It burnt down all the contents, and it started from an American appliance, which wasn't aimed to the Israeli plug, and it caught alight. Whatever the case was, I said, fine, we'll send an assessor over tomorrow, first thing. We sent an assessor over, and the assessor called me up from the place. He said, there's nothing here. I said, what do you mean there's nothing here? You don't see the damage? He said, I see the black walls, but there's nothing. The guy threw away everything. I said, what do you mean? He said he threw it in the dumpster, all the burnt things that he's claiming, everything. It's like an empty shell. So I called the client and said, you didn't keep anything that the assessor can see what it was? Anyway, to make it even worse, he was claiming for a Wimpel collection. I don't even know what a Wimpel is. A Wimpel is, they use them mainly in Germany to tie around the Sefer Torah, like this decorative sort of band. We now use like a little thing that just clicks together. But this is he had apparently a Wimpel collection, and he was claiming 200,000 shekels for this Wimpel collection that no longer existed in the bin or anywhere. It had been thrown away. It was a very complicated case, and unfortunately, we just ordered an assessor to come. It was a new client. The assessor hadn't had a time to come and assess all his stuff, so there was actually nothing to go on but his word. Anyway, it went to court, and I think he was eventually paid out 100,000 because he managed to prove that in a previous place he'd been insured. But we always tell our clients, either take a picture. Today you can take a video, take a picture, or leave some evidence. You can't expect the insurance company to pay out if you've thrown everything away. So that was an example of someone's negligence. On the positive side, I can think of a guy that came into our office one day, and he wanted life insurance, and we sold him life insurance. And in the midst of the conversation, we said, what happens if you were to get sick or to be injured? He was an independent worker. So he took out a policy that would cover him in case of being ill or having an accident. And 3 months later, he was diagnosed with cancer and it didn't work. And thank God, this policy unfortunately passed away 2 or 3 years after that. But this policy kept his family afloat. And after that, we really made an effort to contact all our clients and tell them how important this was to make sure you're taking out cover in these kind of cases. Not only just life insurance, but also this thing to help you if you get ill or you get injured. Very important.
So let's talk a little bit more about that, because that's such an important issue, is this element of having the right kind of insurance. A lot of people rely only on their kupat cholim, their medical aid, with the different levels that they have there. Let's just talk about the addition and the value of having additional health insurance. And also let's touch on about life insurance. Many of our followers here are age 45 up. I know it's on an individual case recommendation. Is it wise to actually reduce the part of their life insurance when their kids are already older, out of the house, married with their own kids? Two separate issues, but there is a link.
Yeah. Again, the general rule about life insurance is that you want to make sure that, God forbid, your income stops coming into the family, your family will be covered. So as your kids move to the house, that's less of a financial burden. And obviously the life insurance policy becomes more expensive. So there is a point that it's not worth carrying on the life insurance. I, for example, stopped my life insurance policy about 6 or 7 years ago. And we put that money into different kinds of investment or investment plans. In terms of health, though, that is very important. Today, what we recommend that people take out is a basic supplementary health insurance, which will cover you for three main things. One of them is operations overseas, which again is not done easily. Most people who are living in Israel are not going to voluntarily choose to go overseas for an operation, but sometimes the best surgeon happens to be in Boston, and you want to have the option of going there. So that's number one. Number two is transplants. You get cover of $1 million plus, depending on which company, and that puts you usually high up on any transplant list. And the third thing that it covers you for is medicines not in the Salbriyut. For example, most things are in the Salbriyut, are covered by Kupatulim, but there are very expensive medicines for rare diseases that are not. And I know that we have people that are getting paid 50 or 60,000 shekels a month.
Wow.
Because thank God they have this policy and they've got a very rare medication, and that's what it costs. And the insurance company pays out 50,000 shekels a month. And it's a relatively inexpensive add-on. So I'm saying Kupat Halim is excellent, and one should take out the highest level of Kupat Halim. But on top of that, one should add on the supplementary health insurance. I don't think you need the cover. You can also buy private coverage here in Israel. That, I think, is less necessary. But certainly for these three things, for the operations, transplants, and the prescription medication not in the Sabriut, that's definitely worthwhile. So we recommend that to all our clients. And again, we try and make sure that people do it. You can't always, you can take the horse to the water, you can't always make him drink. So unfortunately, when it happens and the guy doesn't have the coverage, he says, why didn't I do it? Why didn't you convince me? That's really a sad story.
Listen, it's usually the situation of people saying, oh, it'll never happen to me. And then we never know what's going to happen to us. Sadly, also with the war and with the missiles, although that's something I understand is not covered by the insurance companies, that's something separately from the Rechush or through the government, correct? Any damage?
Mas Rechush covers any damage to any building, to the structure, is covered in full by Mas Rechush. So there's a whole system how you make a claim, small damage, major damage. That's covered by Mas Rechush. The more complicated thing is your property, because there they only cover up to a certain limited amount, and they don't cover for any valuable items. You can't claim that I had $100,000 worth of jewelry, that type of thing. So there's only limited cover over there, and the insurance policies don't really cover you for that either. There are some people that took out cover, what's called terror cover, which you can take out in the good days, but obviously once the war is raging, no insurance company is going to sell anybody terror cover.
Exactly. What about in the case of renting, people renting? Do you want to touch on something like that about general insurance or with the war, but more general?
Look, in general, we recommend that people on both sides should take out insurance. And it's both the person that's renting the apartment and also the owner. They both should take out insurance, and they should basically cover each other. In other words, if the rentor causes damage, then you want to make sure that his policy will cover damage done to the owner's house. In other words, he can't just say, listen, I'm just living in the apartment. It doesn't belong to me, the apartment, and I've just got a few things. So why should I take out insurance? But if one day you plug in something or you do something negligent, you leave the Hanukkah candles burning or whatever, the Shabbos candles burning, and it causes a fire and has major damage to the owner, who's going to pay for that? So that's why you need an insurance policy on your side. And the Baal Bayit, the same thing. If his apartment causes damage to somebody got to, but he's electrocuted or there's a fault in the building, then he wants to make sure that he's covered. So we always recommend that both of them are covered and that they cover each other in their policies, so that both sides are taken care of.
Okay. One last question I want to ask you about insurance, and then we'll move on and summarize about Selwyn and living in Israel, or Shimon, should I say, living in Israel. Strange now that I thought of the Selwyn when I called you Shimon for so many years. I guess it's because you mentioned it earlier. Let's talk about businesses, because we have many business owners listening to this podcast as well. At what stage should a business owner have insurance, and for what type of things?
Look, as soon as you open your doors, the challenge of a business owner is what's called third-party liability. The first day that you open your store, somebody can come in, slip on the floor, and sue you for 100,000 shekels. So you want to make sure that you're covered for that. Now, third-party liability claims are not common. We don't get them every day. But when we do get them, they are serious claims.
That's someone who has a physical store. What about somebody who's working from home? We have many solopreneurs or businesses that are run from homes, not from official offices.
The same thing applies. Again, if a person Let's say you give somebody a business advice, and because of that, the guy loses money and he decides he's going to sue you. That might be right, it might be wrong. But the minute you get sued, you have to respond to that. And what these policies do is that they have a bunch of lawyers that step into your shoes. In other words, they take on the case, they deal with it, they go to court, they do what has to be done. And that takes that load off your shoulders. So even if you don't have a physical store, but you are providing a service, and you think that somebody can sue you. For example, we have a lot of psychotherapists, psychiatrists, psychologists that are working online, and we insure a lot of them, mainly for this thing. There's no physical thing to insure, but there is certainly third-party liability. In other words, professional liability, depending on what degree they have. If somebody gets sued because they gave information or advice, you want to make sure that you're covered for that. So that is a very important thing. So I said that in terms of any business owner, the first thing to think about is third-party liability. Again, it's not very common, and you might think I can get away with it, but again, unfortunately, once it happens, you're stuck.
Yes. Okay. So in the last couple of minutes that we have, because we are coming to an end, let's move back to the dream of Shimon Cohen, making aliyah, living Israel. You've brought up your family here, kids, grandkids. Looking back to the dream that you had as this young lad making aliyah, share with us something about your feelings, the passion about living in Israel. And I know you're passionate about living in Israel.
It's very interesting. For example, when I speak to my children about life in South Africa before we made Aliyah, they can't actually imagine what it was like to be living in apartheid South Africa. For example, I went to Jeppe Boys. I didn't go to Yeshiva College or King David. I didn't go to any Jewish day school. I went to a public school, and I tell my grandchildren there, the headmaster used to cane us if we did something wrong. I think the worst punishment was you got 6 cuts, as they used to call it, with a cane. That was for smoking. That was the worst crime in school. Anything less than that was 4 cuts. But it was instant tshuva. You did something wrong. You got caned 4 times. You had to say, thank you, sir. Very important. You had to thank him for it. And then everything was forgiven. Your slate was clean. So when I tell my kids about this, I think, oh, what is this? Crazy. I went to the army in South Africa. Also another story. When I came here, I did the army here. I was in Miller for about 20 years as a Jeep driver, believe it or not. So Baruch Hashem, now all the children are living in Israel, and as you can imagine, they are much more Israeli than we are. Even when we were growing up, they had to sign the notes to the teachers because our Hebrew was atrocious. So when I look back on it now, Baruch Hashem, we have 30 plus grandchildren, and it really is amazing to think about it, that this all started from, I can actually pinpoint where it started. It was once in Bnei Akiva camp in South Africa. For those of you that don't know, camp was 3 weeks down at the sea, living in tents, no parents, no phones. And I remember it was the first Shabbat that I'd ever had. It was about 400 kids singing Lecha Dodi, and it was such a feeling in my heart. And I think that was the moment that I said, listen, I'm in for this. And one thing led to another, and thank God we've built a home in Israel. Our children have built a home here, our grandchildren are building homes here, and we feel very blessed.
Hashem, I'm curious to know, you talk to your kids in English and your grandkids in Hebrew, or is it just a mishmash of languages?
The grandchildren is mainly Hebrew, although we are trying to teach them English. In other words, we are the beacons of English. We give them all English lessons. So we try and teach them English, but want to really talk heart to heart, it's got to be Hebrew. For our children, we still speak in English. They answer us back in Hebrew. I think 3 or 4 of the kids are pretty fluent in English. Those that caught on to reading in English kept the English. The rest are hopeless cases when it comes to English reading.
I have a similar story with my, so I can totally understand it. Actually, the truth is mine answer me back in mixed English Hebrew. Sometimes I have to say to them when they revert only to Hebrew, talk to me in English.
Yeah.
But our WhatsApps between us are actually mostly in Hebrew. And
Right.
the grandkids is 99% Hebrew.
Yeah.
So I can totally get what you're saying. I think that's a sign for someone who's been here 30, 40 years, where Baruch Hashem, our kids get integrated, they marry Israelis, there's less English in the house. And there's this blessing of obviously keeping the English, and it helps them with so many things. But that's a sign of living in this beautiful place called Eretz Israel, and the dream. I came here with almost no Hebrew. You probably knew more than me.
Yeah, slightly more. As I said, I didn't go to Jewish day school, so I didn't even do Alpanya. I went straight to Boys Town, and that was my baptism of fire, which taught me Hebrew in a big way very quickly. In the insurance world, though, I still use a bit of English now and then because they still look at people from Chutz La'aretz in some kind of awe. We left the Golden Medina type of thing. Although South Africa was never the Golden Medina, but we left the Golden Medina to come to Eretz Israel, and they've got to some kind of respect. I often throw in a bit of English to them, and I think they still think that there's something special about an English-speaking insurance agent who's somehow landed up here in Israel.
Your vision for yourself, for your family, for this beautiful country of ours, Eretz Israel?
We have to carry on building. We have to carry on looking forward, because to say that it's definitely going to happen, we're going to have shalom, and even if it's not on the horizon, we've got to do whatever we can do in our own small way. And I think the very most important thing that I always tell my staff, we're not just in the business of selling policies and making money. We're in the business of helping people. And we are privileged to be in a position that we can do this here in Israel. We had a meeting, it was my late father-in-law's yahrzeit, 29 years since he passed away. And that's what I try to pass on to the staff. I said, listen, even though none of you knew him, that was his dream, that we should build a business that's going to help people. And it's not just the money, and it's not just the policies, it's not just the business. It's to be there when people need us.
Absolutely. And that's part of your tagline as well, to be there when people need you most.
Yeah, that's what we try to do.
Incredible. One final tip that you'd like to end off with to people, and also please mention how people can contact you if they have any questions. Obviously, the website, Egert Cohen Insurance.
Yeah, it's very simple today, relatively, to find out what insurance you have. You can go into a site called Harabitur. We can do it for you, but it's very important, I think, as Leah or Lesley said earlier, not to leave it too late. In other words, don't wait until chas v'shalom, there's a problem, somebody gets sick, and then you suddenly think, wow, if only would have had insurance. That's always too late. So the time to do it is now. Look at what you have, especially in terms of life and health insurance, and make sure that you're covered sufficiently. It's something that you've got to put into your mindset to do. And remember that you're doing it not for yourself, but for your spouse, for your children, and take care of them. So you can get hold of me directly on my cell phone, 0505-482-192. We speak Hebrew, English, Afrikaans, and happy to talk to you. Even advice.
Right, okay. Your email address, do you want to just give that as well?
Yeah, it's Shimon, Shimon, Shimon at Egert Cohen, EGERT,
Great. Thank you, Shimon. We shouldn't need people like you in the business, but sadly, people do need it, and this is part of life, so make sure that we're well covered. Thank you for being our guest on the Monday Motivation Spotlight. Thank you for your ongoing support for English programs, for English organizations. You work with a lot of the institutions as well. So you're very involved in the Anglo community and the Israeli community. So thank you for that. And we wish you much continued health, success in this business. And I'm sure our paths will definitely have a lot of contact in the future as well. So thank you. Thank you to our guests and to our viewers for listening to another episode of the Monday Motivation Spotlight. I'm Lesley Kaplan. We've had wonderful, inspiring speakers over the last almost 3 years. We started this program and this podcast literally a week after October 7th, as a result of October 7th, to make a difference, to give us inspiration, also to give exposure and a spotlight to those amazing individuals making a difference to our wonderful Israeli society. So check out some of our other speakers. If you enjoyed listening to this, I'd love it if you subscribe as well. And most important, stay safe, stay healthy, and Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.